Shouldn't be afraid of bees. Shouldn't be afraid of those creepy crawlies. You should be afraid of me. Shouldn't be scared of the Dracula. Shouldn't be scared of the mummy. Shouldn't be scared of Frankenstein's monster. You should be scared of me. You should be scared of me. The boogeyman under your bed.
Hello and welcome to What a Scream, the podcast where myself and my very special guest discuss horror films in relation to a random topic or subject that I have picked from a hat. So, on this episode, I am talking to my friend Kelan O'Reilly, who is a self-confessed cinephile. He has previously written for Film in Dublin, which is a great resource online for film previews, for reviews. He also previously worked in a cinema, so he has that kind of background. He's also a musician, and he also puts up great little reviews on his Facebook. So I thought he was the perfect guest to get on. And so with Kelan, I am discussing Korean horror. We have seen Korean cinema become very successful, what with Bong Joon-ho's Parasite winning the Best Film Award at the Oscars last year. One of the films we're discussing is a previous film by Bong Joon-ho called The Host. It is a monster film, and it is definitely unlike any Hollywood monster films you have ever seen. We are also discussing A Tale of Two Sisters, a beautiful cinematic piece from 2003 that merges psychological horror as well as supernatural. Now, before I get into my interview and discussion with Kelan, I'm going to give a little bit of background on Korean horror. Although it's always been around since the very beginning of Korean cinema, K-horror, as it is more known, had a resurgence in the 1990s along with the popularity of Japanese horror or J-horror. Korean horror, it focuses on a lot of human suffering and emotional trauma and anguish of its characters, as opposed to more of explicit horror or gore that we tend to see in a lot of Western horror. It has very similar themes to J-horror, which is why it kind of goes hand in hand. We see a reoccurring thing with the female ghost. So we all know that typical ghost from like The Ring, The Grudge, of a woman with long black hair that sometimes we can only see their eyes. So we see this theme of the female ghost, and it is said that this is kind of representative of rage and vengeance brought about by the oppression of women within cultures like Korea and Japan, where women, as we've previously discussed with the film Audition, women are expected to be subservient to men. Another very big theme within Korean horror is the theme of revenge. We look at South Korea's history, and we can kind of see that this theme of revenge is almost from like the social anger that's been experienced. Obviously, Korea has a history with America, and that is a theme that comes up in films. So let's get started. Here is my chat with Kelan O'Reilly about K-horror. I'd like to welcome my guest for this episode, Kelan. Hello, how are you?
Hello, I'm very good. How are you?
I'm okay. This episode is going to be going out in around February. So right now, for people that don't know, we're still in lockdown in Ireland.
Yeah.
So it's, I said this before, but it's like we're living through our own kind of pandemic horror.
Yeah,
It really
absolutely.
is. And,
It's a little boring compared to some horror films, maybe, but
it is, yeah. I mean, I've been watching The Walking Dead, and I'm kind of like,
oh, really?
Is it going to get that far?
That's like that's a very oppressive thing to be watching in this time. Like, oh, do you know what? I'll just double down on pandemic.
I like to think it's preparation.
Okay. It's very grim. That show is very grim, though. It's like I don't know. Yeah, I gave up on that a while back.
But, you know, I think it's good research for just in case.
Yeah.
Just
True,
in case there's
true.
a zombie outbreak. What would I do? What would I not do?
You're gonna be sorted.
I would. And would I, it's like, kind of, would I be on Rick's side or would I be on, Negan's side or
Okay,
who would I be?
I think I left off around the point when Negan showed up.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I mean, we all like to think we're like a Michonne character, that would be like really badass.
She's
but
cool.
I kind of think I'd be more like, what's his name? Eugene. Do you remember?
Oh, really? Okay. Eugene's
I
not.
like
I like Eugene.
Whoever's gonna save me. So, starting off, why don't you give us a little bit of a thing about yourself, who you are, what you're into, etc.
Okay. Well, I'm Kelan. Obviously, you know that, but everybody else. I am, I'm huge into film. I have over the years, I took up kind of critical analysis and stuff. I started writing for a website called Film in Dublin. So I wrote a lot of reviews for them. I haven't done anything with them in a while. And then obviously this past year has just kind of been almost a write-off. Well, it's weird not having cinemas around, and I've watched a good few films, but it's not the same. I don't know. Anyway, that's going off topic, but yeah. So I'm a musician as well. I've played music all my life. So I think music and film have been two very, very big passions for me.
You're a great one for putting up like reviews up on Facebook. I always I'm not mad into Facebook. I'm just a scroller, but I do always stop and like read your little reviews, and I love your interview reviews you do for like your films of the year. I really, really enjoy that, and I've always found that your reviews, like we have the same kind of ideas about films, which I really, really like.
Well, that's cool. Yeah, because I mean, I don't know, you just kind of throw them out there onto Facebook, and it's like, is anybody paying attention to them? I don't know. It's kind of just a place for me to get things off my mind after I've watched them, because I'm like, I have a film going around in my head, and I'm like, okay, I'll just post about it on Facebook, whatever, and then I can move on to the next thing. So but yeah, nice to know that
I'm definitely like, I should interact a bit more. I'm a bit of a lurker. I'm like that.
I think most people are on Facebook. I think I guess that's kind of the way it works.
Yeah, but that's kind of one of the reasons I started this podcast. I was like, I have all these thoughts about mainly horror films, because they are like an obsession. And like Oscar, who is my partner, he's just not interested in horror. He likes horror, but he's like, I don't care. I don't care as much as you do.
Okay.
I don't care about the imagery or the metaphors or blah blah.
Really?
No. So I thought I'd start this podcast to try to get it out there. It's like a form of
absolutely
therapy for me.
Absolutely. Yeah. And fair play, because it's something I wish I'd done a long time ago, but I've never gotten around to it. So
I definitely think the lockdown forced me. I was like, I have to do something, otherwise I'm going to lose my mind. Like
yeah.
And especially when you're locked up with the little freaking Damien devil child, you're like 3-year-olds. I started going, I'm going to pull back his hair and I'm going to find 666 on his head. Like, so what is your relationship like with horror? Do you like horror films? Do you enjoy the experience of horror films?
Yeah, you know what? I do. I love the experience of horror films. I think my relationship with horror films is that I don't know. I find it a film rarely scares me. I think that's a main thing to kind of point out. I think a lot of people can go to just any old horror film and they're like jumping out of their seat and they're like, oh my god, I'm just gonna sit there like, okay. You might get a little jump or something, but I think like mainstream American horror films, I'm not really that interested in. I would imagine most people who are horror enthusiasts probably aren't either that much into.
Yeah, I think when you're a horror enthusiast, you can understand that those kind of horror, especially with like James Wan universe at the moment, obviously with like The Conjuring and all that, it's cheap.
But they are kind of cool.
They're cool. They're great, and they obviously fill a need in the horror cinema. Otherwise, they won't be as popular as they are. but they are definitely cheap thrills. You know, once the film's ended, it's gone. You're not really thinking about it.
No.
And I think, but there seems to be a lot of coming and going, almost like the fashion of horror. So say in the 80s with the slasher, again, they were just cheap thrills, you know.
Yeah.
Again, in the 90s with the resurgence of slasher with I Know What You Did Last Summer, Scream, just cheap thrills. It's not something that you really kind of delving too much into. But then again, it's kind of like, well, the reason they're so popular is they must represent something and reflect something within our society. Otherwise, there wouldn't be such a need.
Well, definitely, yeah. And sorry, I'll take back a little bit what I said. I mean, I know there's people who are very into the slasher films and very into, you know, all that kind of stuff from the 80s, or even the present day, kind of like James Wan kind of stuff. So different taste. But yeah, for me, most of that stuff, other than like the cheap thrill or the little jump scare, it doesn't stay with me very long. I'm not like, it gets a bit samey to me. Yeah. And it doesn't leave you with much kind of to think about. So saying that, the kind of genre of horror film that I like is, you know, the kind of psychological stuff, which Korean horror, I think Japanese horror play into that a little bit. You know, they're slower, they're more atmospheric. And then, you know, the kind of more independent horror films where you're dealing with topics, you know, like mental health or something, or trauma or loss. And there's a lot of metaphors going on. You know, some people are like, you know, stupid. But that's to me, that's more horror, because it's touching on real kind of human issues that, you know, people are dealing with, that people struggle with. So it's kind of a more human horror that kind of appeals to me.
Yeah, I think that's right with like a lot of film fans as well, is that there's like two mindsets that you're in. You know, sometimes you just want that blood and guts and gore and mindless stupidity. I mean, I had Emma Tyrrell on, and we were, because she does forensic psychology, we were talking about the psychology behind the horror film. And sometimes as a cathartic thing, as a bit of a form of therapy, you just want to put the blood and guts on, because you want that serotonin release you get when you're being scared. You get like a release of serotonin.
Oh, and there is that, the whole gross out thing that can really like, But
there are times where you're like, actually, I need a movie to make sense. And I need to feel something. Like the films that have really stuck with me, a director that I'll be talking about later, Park Chan-wook, he does the Vengeance trilogy. Yeah. And those films, especially Lady Vengeance, really stuck with me, and they still stick with me, and I love them. And it's because I could relate emotionally to them, even though you could say they're still kind of horror. Yeah. Especially our topic today, obviously, is Korean horror films. And I think along with Japanese horror, Korean filmmakers are amazing at creating these emotionally charged horror films.
Absolutely, yeah.
What is your experience with Korean film and Korean horror films? Are you into
Korean film? Is, I would say, you know, one of my favorite country. You know, Korea. The films that come out of Korea be one of my favorite. I don't want to say genre, but yeah, you know, the stuff that comes out of Korea, I absolutely love it. There's, you know, some of my favorite films are Korean films, not necessarily horror films, but I don't know. It's funny. I think Korean films, we'll probably, you know, end up talking about this a bit in some of the films we picked, but they're not always just one thing. Yeah. So they a lot of them can have elements of horror, but they could be a revenge thriller. But you know, there's horror in there as well, or there's drama, or there's sometimes dark comedy and stuff. And they I don't know, they brilliantly kind of weave a line through all these different genres. And I really love that. You know, you kind of it's a lot more unpredictable. You kind of don't know where it's going sometimes. Yeah.
That's one thing I found with Korean horror film or drama, is that the subjects are kind of, if you think again, talking about like the Vengeance trilogy from Park Chan-wook, is, I'm taking like Lady Vengeance as the specific. When I first saw it, I viewed it as a horror.
Right.
But it's also a thriller, and it's like, it freaked me out. It really badly freaked me out, and it really I was thinking about it for
Yeah.
days afterwards. And
Well,
another thing, like with Korean cinema, is it's so beautifully shot. It's so
really is.
oh
Yeah.
my gosh, it's just beautiful, and everything is so well thought out, from like wallpaper or the coloring or makeup that a character wears. It's just all thought out so well, and it's like it's all metaphors.
Yes.
And that's something I really enjoy as
it's
a movie.
art. Yeah.
Art. And then you watch. I remember letting when I was 18, like my boyfriend at the time watch Lady Vengeance, and he was like, I don't get it. And I was like, you don't understand it. You don't get it.
Yeah. You know, because some people just want the simple thrill, you know, and that's fair enough. So yeah, it's two different kind of styles. Just kind of going back a bit to what you were saying, like, you know, you look at Lady Vengeance as a horror in ways. For me, the same with Old Boy.
Yeah.
So I think that was one of my first Korean films that I ever saw. But it stayed with me for so long. It's
the American remake. The American remake is awful in comparison. Like
rubbish.
Do not like watch the original.
Absolutely watch the original. But yeah, I mean, it's one of my favorite films. I always recommend it to people, but you know, when I knew I was coming on the show and I had to pick a Korean horror film, I was like, can I pick Old Boy? Is it a horror film? Is it not a horror film? To me, it is. To a lot of people, they'd probably say, no, that's not horror. But you know, that got under my skin. That you know, it stayed with me for so long. And it's very psychological, I guess. You know, if you were going to label it something, you'd call it maybe a psychological horror. I know a lot of people would call it a thriller, but I mean, there's just some moments in that are just, you know, just kind of blew my mind and stayed with me. And anybody I've shown it to, and they're like,
I know, yeah. The twist at the end is one of the most horrific twists.
Horrific.
In all cinema history.
It's horrific. It's horror, you know. So, but this is what I was saying. It's such a fine line, and I don't know. They just weave around it all the time. So, in the end, I didn't pick Old Boy, but one of my favorites. It's amazing.
It is. The movie that you did pick is, I only watched it for the first time when you mentioned it.
Oh, really? Yeah.
And it's obviously we'll talk about it more, but do you want to introduce it for us? Okay.
So the film I ended up picking was The Host, which is directed by, his name has just gone from my mind, the director of Parasite, Bong Joon-ho. Yes, of course. So, and again, Parasite was a film I was like, well, I maybe pick Parasite because, you know, so will we just pause here for a second and just on the topic of Parasite?
I think maybe we should talk about it, obviously, because it won Best Film at the most recent Oscars.
Yeah.
And holy crap.
Yeah.
Like, I only finished watching it last night.
Yeah. After I told you to go watch the rest of it.
I wasn't that bothered, and then you were like, no, you have to finish this. And
you stopped right before, right at the point where it just
blows up. And like, just to give a warning, we are gonna spoil all these films. So if you haven't watched them, you need to go. Please. There's a reason it won Best Film. Like, there is.
Pause this, go watch it, come back. Yeah.
I just was not expecting it. Like you mentioned before, Korean film has this habit of like completely taking a left turn and switching tones, switching genres.
Yeah.
And I went into Parasite thinking it was this like kooky kind of dark comedy, you know, with this slapstick family, and then it just turned, and I'm like, what the actual living hell is going on?
Yeah, so I mean, I went in knowing that there was definitely a dark kind of, you know, element to it, and I was expecting something kind of sinister. But when you reach that halfway point and it takes that turn, I was just like, oh my God, I did not see that coming, like, at all. And again, I think that film, it kind of almost splits it in half. So the first half is like this family drama, like you said, kind of bit of comedy and stuff. Yeah. The second half then is pretty much full on horror film, I would say. and it's crazy, yeah. But yeah, so I almost picked Parasite.
Yeah.
But then I was like, no, you know what? Let's go back a bit. Let's go back to one of his earlier films, The Host, which again, along with Old Boy, was one of the first Korean films I ever saw. And again, it kind of blew my mind. It's kind of a different. We're going into a different area of horror, I guess, because it's a monster movie.
Mm-hmm.
So, and even this, I was like, is it a horror film? Is it not?
Yeah.
But it has a monster in it, so I guess it is a horror film.
And I think, like with other Korean, it's horror isn't just with the monster; it's with the humans.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
The horror of how vulnerable sectors of society are treated.
Yeah.
By the government
exactly. Yeah. So there's a lot of social commentary and stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so The Host, which I haven't actually described yet for people, but it is a monster movie. So you have this kind of dysfunctional Korean family. They're living basically in their shop, aren't they? Which is it's a kind of a shack by the river, and they're just kind of living in it. You've got the grandfather, the daughter, this kind of dysfunctional father, and then there's a brother and sister who you kind of meet later on, but she's off. She's a famous archer. Anyway, they're living by this river, and being a monster movie, there's a giant creature that emerges from the Han River, takes the kid away, snatches the kid. The film kind of develops from there in that, is the kid dead? The family kind of thinks she's not. And obviously things explode as well with tensions with the government. There's this idea that there might be a virus being spread by the monster.
Very poignant for what's going on today.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's one thing that struck me hard about that it was a few things that were said, and I was like, oh my god, that could be.
I know. Yeah. It's funny watching everyone in the hazmat suits and stuff, and it actually just feels like such a normal thing to be watching that film right now. You're like, oh yeah, I can relate to that. But yeah, so where was I? So like you said, you've got this whole kind of social commentary going on in the film as well. So I don't know. There's a strange, well, not strange, but Bong Joon-ho, I think in a lot of his films, he kind of touches on it. He definitely touches on it in Parasite as well. And it's this relationship between South Korea and American culture. And I think The Host is kind of very, you could almost view it as anti-American, but
even like the opening scene, there's the American scientist or mortician, whatever they are, and he's given out about the dusty formaldehyde bottles, and he orders
it down the drain.
Even though he's South Korean worker, he's like, no, this will pollute the Han River. He's like, no, do it. So even from the get-go,
he's like,
it's like,
I don't care. Yeah. And so interestingly enough, I don't know if you know, but that's actually based on a real incident. There was a US scientist who actually told this guy to pour all this formaldehyde down the drain into the river. And that kind of inspired the idea for this film, that formaldehyde seeps into the river, mutates this monster, but then emerges and starts causing all the chaos.
When I read up about it, apparently he actually read an article about they found a deformed fish in the Han River.
Okay.
And that's where he got his inspiration for the actual monster. So all of this is like, you could say it's based on a true story, obviously without the giant monster.
The giant monster, yeah. But so the monster in the film it's this kind of deformed fish creature with little stumpy legs, and he's got these other little fish sticking out of him or something. But it's not a very slick looking monster, but I think it's cool. It's kind of, there's some just, it stumbles, it falls over, but then it also has these cool moments where it's got this big long tail and it's hanging from that bridge and it's swinging along. And you're like, whoa. And another thing I love, which I just wasn't expecting. So again, this was one of, the first Korean monster movie. I don't think there is many Korean monster movies, but it was the first one I definitely saw anyway. And one of the first Korean films I saw. And the fact that just, near the start of the film, you were introduced to this family. They're along the river, they're dealing with their everyday, selling their food to the to the people out sunbathing and stuff. He wanders down to the river. People are like, oh, what's this? What's this? And then out of nowhere, the monster just fully emerges, and just, you know, you just aren't expecting it that early on, and it just rampage. You see it kind of in full view. There's no hiding it. It's just, and it kind of takes you back at first, because it's like, oh my god, like,
because
wow,
we're so used to like Americanized horror, monster horror films where we don't see the monster.
No,
if like Jaws, you only see the pit. Or, you know, there's a few things in Godzilla where the American version, obviously, you see its eye in the dark, you know, so we're not used to seeing a monster in full view, in full daylight. Like
straight away, just straight off the bat at the start of the film. And, you know, I think the whole idea of keeping something hidden is great. And it works really well in a lot of things, you know, because I've also seen American films where they just kind of show you the monster straight away and you're just like, oh, okay, that's it. Yeah. But it works so well in this film because it's just, you know, it's obviously a conscious decision to just straight off the bat show the consequences of what has happened. And, you know, the film isn't so much about, like you said, it's not so much about the horror of the monster, but the horror of then what occurs after that, and, you know, how it's mismanaged by authorities, and the toll it takes on this family as well. And that's the interesting thing. And you've got this whole kind of melodrama and family drama going on as well, and a lot of moments of weird, like, kind of slapstick as well. That just work, you know.
Weirdly enough, like, I went into it thinking it was going to be like an American monster movie, but it's not at all. And you've got this, I mean, you'd never find in American monster movies slapstick comedy, but there is, like, there's slapstick comedy, but then again, like Parasite, it takes a swift turn. You know, there's one point where the main character, who's seen as like a kind of like a fool, the fool of the, you know, the family, and they take him into like quarantine, and there's all hazmat suits everywhere, and then they start doing a lobotomy on him. Because
oh my god,
says that the virus is found in the frontal lobe, and it's just so terrifying.
It really is.
But yet you've had this comedy beforehand, and it's almost like you don't know how to feel your emotions, or like, should I laugh? Should I, you know, it's all over the place.
It gives you this kind of emotional whiplash, but again, I think it's very intentional, you know, and it's kind of it's drawing attention to the absurdity of the situation, but at the same time still highlighting the horror of the situation. You know, it's like, it's so kind of horrific that all you can do is almost laugh at certain points, and then but then it's like, and then it drags you right back. And I think Bong Joon-ho does that in a lot of his films, you know, expertly. You know, it's amazing the way he kind of treads that line. And yeah, great. And so the host for me, when I first saw that was just, it was again, I didn't know. I was like, am I supposed to be laughing here? Am I not? But then there's moments where you're like, okay, I'm definitely supposed to be laughing here. This is just. And then, you know, it's something I think audiences watching aren't necessarily aware of, you know, South Korea's relationship with America. And I think Parasite deals with that, you know, a fair bit as well. The rich people idolizing them, and at the expense, you know, the poor people who just can't afford anything.
Yeah, I mean, the way that I got from the host was it's almost a political satire. You know, it's very... It's very on the nose about things. You've got it's anti-Americanism kind of themes, and it's, as you said, the caricatures, and then you've got this again. It's almost like the lead character, who's seen as this fool and bumbling idiot. It's almost like the Korean government is like a reflection of him, because they're also bumbling and they're also fool, and they don't know how to deal, and they're making stuff up, and you know. But then there's a point towards the end where there is protesters. And it's almost like Bong Joon-ho was making a point about the other side as well, like not just the governments. He was making a commentary about these people that will just go out and, you know, they will oppose this, but at their own risk. So obviously at the end they get the Agent Yellow gas. Obviously a take on Agent Orange. But that affects them and kills them, and it's just, you know, it's just this whole commentary on politicalness, especially within South Korea. Because Yeah.
Sorry, what I was going for earlier was this whole kind of commentary on Korean identity and what is their identity and their, I think as much as he's criticizing America, he also has, it's a kind of a love-hate thing.
Yeah.
Because obviously he's been quite influenced by American films, but he's spinning it in his own way, and I guess wrestling himself with these ideas of what elements of it are good, what elements of it aren't. But there's definitely a kind of thread of Korean people, like, are they losing their identity and their culture, and just at the expense of kind of glorifying this American presence.
Yeah.
And then you just have the Americans mishandling things. But nobody comes off as specifically right. Like you said, like the Koreans are often portrayed as just bumbling, and police forces are idiotic, and that's in a lot of Korean films I've noticed. The police force is always just a shambles. There's a film called Memories of Murder. I don't know if you've watched that.
No.
Okay, I would recommend checking that out. That is Bong Joon-ho as well, if I'm not mistaken, and it's kind of talked about as the Korean equivalent of Zodiac, if you've ever seen Zodiac. So it was a famous serial killer in South Korea that was, I think, never really caught, and the Memories of Murder is just tracking that investigation and all the mistakes that were made along the way, and the ineptitude. So again, that's a running theme with law enforcement and everything in South Korean films, that they just don't seem to be great. I don't know if that's true or not, but there must be.
When I think about like a Lady Vengeance, she's wrongfully convicted, although she has to be to save her daughter, but the police force is seen as a bit stupid, and obviously so I kind of see that. But yeah, I'd like to think that when Bong Joon-ho got his Oscars, obviously in America, he almost found it quite funny and quite like quite ironic that Parasite was quite it's not as anti-American as you'd think the host would be, but it was still. But
there's some jabs in there, definitely. Yeah. But again, I don't think it's taking a jab at America specifically. It's more the culture. Well, in Parasite anyway, more the culture of affluent people who think the more English I can speak and the more American products I own, the cooler I am, and like some kind of status symbol. Whereas I think he's just saying, well, embrace a bit of what makes you Korean. So bringing it back to the host, you have these nice moments in the film of the family just sitting together eating a meal, and they're just eating their noodles and their Korean sushi and stuff, and and it's those nice little quiet moments that's kind of, I think, him saying this is what it should be about.
I think that's a nice way to round off that film.
Okay, so cool.
That was The Host, which was directed by Bong Joon-ho, who is also the director of Parasite. 2 films which you should definitely go watch.
Yes, absolutely.
Just check out his whole back catalogue. Like, he also directed Snowpiercer, which is a massive cult favorite now. And,
it is. Yeah.
He also directed, was it Okja?
I
didn't realize that until I looked up last night, and I was like,
oh really?
But now looking back, you're kind of like, I get it now. That's definitely a film.
It has a lot of the same themes and everything.
Yeah, and like imagery as well. If you look at a film, you definitely know it's his film, and I think that's when you know that a director has really like cemented themselves as a great director, is where you can look at any film and just know that it's one of theirs.
It's their style,
So the next film that I chose is 2003's A Tale of Two Sisters. I watched a shitload of Korean horror working up to this episode just because I wanted to get like a full background on what Korean horror is, and I just kept coming back to this film. Do I necessarily think it's as great as everyone makes it out to be? No.
Okay.
But I do think it's an important one to So I will give a quick-ish synopsis because there is a lot in this film. This film is
Yeah.
a big bag of complicated.
Absolutely, yeah.
So it was written and directed by Kim Jee-woon, and it was inspired by a folk tale that was from the Joseon dynasty. And it is also Korean.
Are you sure you got that pronunciation right?
Oh, I hope so. I'd like to think my Korean has improved since watching all of these films.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was the highest grossing Korean horror film and the first to be screened in America's cinemas. So it's a pretty big deal when it comes to horror.
Yeah.
Of course, it had an awful American remake because that's what Americans like to do. They like to remake. And we all know that no, just leave it alone.
Yeah.
So the remake.
If you ever see that there's an American remake of an Asian film of any variety, just avoid it. Just stay away.
One that I'd be like, yeah, check out the remake.
The Departed is actually a remake. It's not a horror film now, obviously, but The Departed is a remake of a Chinese series of films, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
And that's a good film. So,
okay.
But I think that's the exception. It was Martin Scorsese, so
Okay. So the Uninvited was the American remake. If you're interested at all, but nah.
I saw it years ago, and I was like, oh no. It's not the worst of them, but it's nothing compared to the original. As always. So.
So the film opens on our teenager, Sumi. She's in some sort of institution. And she has obviously had a psychotic break, or, she's dealing with mental health problems. And she is returning back to her family's secluded country home with her father and her little sister, Soo-yeon. We see a very strained relationship with their stepmother, Yoon-ju, who seems to continuously have to take medication. All through the film, we see the father handing the stepmother medication to take.
Some medication, yeah.
So when Sumi returns, weird things start happening, as does happen in these weird films that center on women. Yeah. So we start seeing ghosts of her dead mother. She hears strange things. She finds photographs that show her stepmother, Yoon-ju, was the in-home nurse when her mother was sick. And that her father had an affair even before the mother had passed away. So the film goes on, and Sumi starts to suspect Yoon-ju, the stepmother, of abusing her little sister. And when she approaches her stepmother about it, her stepmother just brushes her off and refuses to apologize and whatsoever. So we've got this classic setup of almost a fairy tale. We've got the wicked stepmother.
Yeah.
And then there's the scene that kind of got me a bit, where they are having dinner with the aunt and the uncle.
It's a great scene.
Yeah. And the stepmother is talking about these childhood stories, and the uncle is saying, I don't remember this. And then all of a sudden, the aunt,
no idea what you're talking about. Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the aunt starts having this massive, is it an epileptic fit or convulsion?
Some kind of seizure. Yeah.
I thought at first I was like, was she poisoned? Because she starts obviously vomiting, and it's just this, it's almost like the centerfold. If the movie was 2 pages, it's the centerfold.
Yeah.
There, everything starts happening. And the aunt actually says she sees a ghost of a girl underneath the kitchen cabinet.
It's like a turning point in the film for sure. Yeah.
So again, it's almost like the fairy tale book. Metaphors. The film is all about metaphors. So then Yoon-ju finds her pet bird. She's got this beautiful bird that she keeps in a beautiful cage, and she finds it mutilated. Then she finds all her photographs have been cut up, and she punishes Soo-yeon, the youngest sister, by locking her in the closet. And then Sumi goes to confront the father about the abuse, and he tells Sumi to get a grip, that Soo-yeon is dead. So that
shock. Yeah.
So So that is the first major plot twist we have.
Yes. Yeah.
And I knew the plot twist before I saw it because I am that awful annoying bitch that goes and like reads up on films before watching them.
Oh no.
I know it's really annoying, but you know what it is? I think it's because I have such bad anxiety that I have to know. Like sometimes I just have to know.
Yeah.
Otherwise I get really anxious about watching films.
You didn't know about the twist in Parasite, so that's good.
Yeah, I managed to hold that off, and I didn't know about the other twist in A Tale of Two Sisters, so that was good.
And here's what I'll say about that is that I think really, God, it's so long ago. The first time I watched that film, I can't quite remember, but I'm pretty sure that I saw that first twist kind of coming. You know, I don't think they're trying to hide. They're not trying to hide that too much.
Yeah,
because the whole kind of point is that it's hiding the next twist. You know what I mean? So you never see the other one coming because you're kind of maybe focused on this first one, and you're like, like you're kind of shocked, but you're like, I kind of saw that. I kind of saw that, but then it's what they hit you with after that. You're like, oh, okay.
So then Sumi sees her stepmother drag and beat a bloody sack, which is really kind of weird, and they fight, and then the father finds Sumi unconscious. Yeah. And
like what? Honestly, it's kind of for a lot of the film, you're kind of just like, what's going on?
Yeah.
You know, it really none of like. I love that though, but it really doesn't kind of pull together till the end.
Yeah, and even then, there's not much pulling together.
Yeah,
but,
I'll let. Yeah.
She's dragging this sack, and like you said, it's like, what is she doing? Like, what is going on? Like, and she hits it with a spatula, doesn't she, or something like that? And you're just like,
she starts into it like I think, like a fire poker or something. Actually, I think, yeah.
Then Sumi regains consciousness, and her father has put her in the living room, and then the other plot twist is revealed, and it turns out that Soo-yeon and her stepmother have been hallucinations.
Yeah, the mother's not there at all either.
And then it's been Sumi acting out these different characters because of her dissociative identity disorder. And that, you know, there's a really disturbing scene where, well, you don't realize it's disturbing until later on, but like in this, well, now we know a hallucination, but the stepmother tries to like sleep with the father. And then you realize that it was actually Sumi, and you're just like, oh, it reminds me of the twist in Old Boy where you're just like, you're like, no. So then the father and then the real stepmother comes in, and they send her back to the institution, and
you kind of think, oh, the real stepmother, like maybe, you know, she seems a lot nicer. Okay, she wasn't that bad after all.
Maybe she's not, you know, the wicked stepmother. But then we see through flashbacks that no, she is she's pretty nasty.
She was kind of horrible.
So we see that the mother hung herself in Soo-yeon's closet, and when Soo-yeon went to try and help her, the closet fell on top of her, crushing her. And
that's it. That scene is like, oh god.
That's pretty like right in the feels right there. Yoon-ju goes to see what's happening and finds her, and as she's going to try and get help, she comes across Sumi, and they have a bit of an altercation, and Yoon-ju turns to her and says, "You'll regret this moment," and then she decides not to help and just to leave like Soo-yeon to die. And then Sumi goes off and out into the garden or whatever, none the wiser.
Not knowing. And then hence why she's so fucked up, because she finds out afterwards, if she hadn't confronted the stepmother in the hall, stepmother would have gone back to save her sister.
So she's dealing with all this grief and guilt. She has this break. So,
and who could blame her?
Right? I mean, that's pretty full on. But it's just there's so much left. Like you're left wondering about so much after, and that.
But I love that. Well, you know, in any film, I love that. But
I mean, I am definitely one of those people that likes a thorough ending. I like everything to have an ending. But saying that, I did really enjoy the after effects. This film.
It's a film that stays with you because, like I said, it only really puts that final puzzle piece in place for you at the very, very end. And then it's up to you to kind of to go back and think through everything you've just seen and be like, oh my God, that's, that's what was going on. That's the significance of this scene, that scene.
Yeah. Although there's all these, like, there's these questions like, is this actually happening? Are her hallucinations? There's all these like different kind of like timestamps. So you've got her hallucinations where her sister's still alive and her stepmother's been there, and then you've got her in the house with the father alone, and she's having these hallucinations. But is that just another hallucination? Is she actually still in the institution?
No.
You don't think so?
I don't think so. I kind of disagree with that line of thinking in any film where people kind of bring that up and go, oh, was it all a dream all along? I'm like, well, that's just not very interesting.
I know, it's a bit of a cop-out. Like... Yeah,
you kind of have to take these things at obviously not face value because, it's not that clear, but you have to kind of take what you're presented with as the semi kind of weird reality that you're being presented with and not start second or triple guessing, what's happened. So, I think, she leaves the mental institute at the start of the film. Everything that happens does happen. It's just presented to us in a kind of a strange way through her eyes where, we don't really know what's going on until the end. But I do think all that happened. It was her and her father there in that house for most, the duration of the film, really. And then the stepmother shows up at the end.
Yeah, see, I don't... Usually I'd be like, I hate that. And it was all a dream. I hate those endings. I used to use those in my essays when I was at school. Like, I hate those endings.
Anybody does. Yeah.
But when you look at the imagery of the film, you're kind of like, is it? Because we've got the house itself is like, it's almost like another character within the film. It's, at night it's alive with the sounds, and there's a really strong image of the wallpaper within the house.
Yeah. Which I think even is one of the first shots, like the opening credits over the wallpaper.
If you look at it, it looks like there's eyes in the wallpaper, and it's like it's a bit like the fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe. It's like this living house, and then it's like, well, is it a physical house or is it a manifestation of Sumi's mind? She's in the institution and she has this little house in her head. Yoonju, who is like the personification of her rage. And then you've got, Soo-yeon, which is like her personification of her guilt and her grief. And of course, when you have grief and guilt and a massive traumatic event, you create these ghosts.
Yeah.
We're all haunted by ghosts of our past, as sad as that sounds, but we are. And so even, at the end where the stepmother goes back in and there's the ghost and you think, oh, so the ghosts were real.
Yeah.
I was kind of like, is that another manifestation that, that's what she wishes? She wishes her stepmother to be dead.
Okay. Yeah. So actually it's, as you're talking about it, I'm like, okay, it's kind of interesting. She's potentially, this is just her working everything out in her head. And she never left the institution, I guess. Yeah. And I think either way, the point of all those scenes remains the same. The metaphors remain and what she's working out in her head remains. But yeah, it is a film, I guess, that does make you call into question, what was real and what wasn't, because it's all a completely unreliable narrator, as as the term is.
And what did you think of the actual horror elements of the film? I mean, obviously it is more psychological, but there are horror elements of the ghosts. So what did you think of those?
I thought they were really effective, like some really effective horror scenes, some great jump scares.
Yeah.
For people that like those kind of things. I mean, I've seen that film a couple of times and I actually rewatched it earlier just before this, and some of those jumps got me again. And I rarely jump at films, but so some very effective jump scares. Obviously, the psychological element is very prevalent, and the tension and the build up and everything.
Yeah.
And and then you have that kind of, it's more really a Japanese horror trope, but the lady with the hair and everything, and you have some creepy scenes with that, and obviously that's kind of crept into American horror now as well. But it all originated from that kind of stuff. And it's funny. I think A Tale of Two Sisters might have been the first Korean film I saw, and I was on a roll of watching a lot of Japanese horror. Before that, like The Ring, and what's the other one? The Grudge. And I was like, those terrified me when I was younger. Absolutely terrified me. And then I heard about this film, Tale of Two Sisters, and I was like, oh, I'll check that out. And I was expecting just, because I don't think the Japanese films quite nail the human drama of it as much as the Korean ones do. So I wasn't quite expecting that, and I think I was pleasantly surprised. That kind of began my love affair with Korean cinema then. But so I was really surprised there was the great drama element and the family story and the psychological factor, and then you just had these great horror moments as well, which I thought were really effective. So
I mean, there's a scene where I think it's her mother's ghost, appears on her bed and stands above her and bleeds. You're like, oh
yeah.
But obviously you've got as you said, it's known to be a Japanese trope, but it's also a Korean one of the long-haired lady with the eye. You just see like the eye coming out from there. And that freaked me out, because it took me back to those days where I was into the Japanese horror and being petrified of like black hair. That's kind of because I got black hair now, but like being petrified of black hair. But I think a great thing about A Tale of Two Sisters is it doesn't overdo it.
No.
Not to the
it
point
keeps it to those. There's the few effective moments that he uses it. It's really effective. Yeah.
And I think it really plays on well with the psychological horror. As well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Interesting point. I don't know if I only just copped this today. Really, I don't think any other time I watched it I kind of copped it. But you were saying about when the uncle and his wife come over to visit at the dinner table thing, she starts having that fit.
Yeah.
Apparently, what they were going for there is that fit she's having is actually a reenacting of Sue. Is it Sue Mi when she gets crushed by is that her name?
Oh, Soo Young when she gets crushed.
When Soo Young gets crushed. So I don't know if you notice when Soo Young's getting crushed and her hands are kind of flailing under the thing. So when the wife at the dinner table is having that fit, her hands are doing the exact same thing. So it's actually, and then she sees the ghost of the girl. So it's kind of a little moment of possession almost. That's reenacting that.
Yeah, that's the great thing about A Tale of Two Sisters, and with most Korean horror films that I've watched, is you can go back and you can rewatch them and you pick up on these little tiny details.
Little things.
Because when you're first watching a film, you're kind of more concentrating on the plot line and the character development. So sometimes certain little nuances or certain little details kind of go amiss. But I find that when you go back and watch Korean films, especially because they're so beautifully, like they are beautiful. Like
they are beautiful.
They are chef's kiss. That you can go back and pick up on all these little things. Like, I mean, I haven't rewatched A Tale of Two Sisters yet, but I definitely want to. And I just love that those little details that you can get real nerdy about.
Absolutely,
So I think that pretty much concludes our two films.
Okay. I will say I feel quite bad. You had a good like kind of plot point by point analysis of the film there. I feel like I just kind of went off on tangents about the host. Anybody watching probably doesn't even know what it's about. I explained that very well. We kind of started talking about themes and everything. The plot. Look, now you can go watch the film, find the plot out for yourself. Yeah.
It's a giant note. That's all you have to. That's all you have to think about. But yeah, I really enjoyed the Korean horror. I think for horror fans, it's something that you can't call yourself like a horror fan unless you've kind of really explored Korean horror.
Okay. Yeah.
Because it's so full of like themes and social commentary, and I just think that everyone needs to go
Yeah, and just a unique angle that you're just not going to get in, in say
Western
American
cinema,
horror
yeah.
or in Western stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the same goes for Korean cinema in general. But yeah, definitely horror fans. It's something I think to definitely explore and check out. And there's a lot of other films that I think you watched in the run up to it. There's one on Netflix now called The Call. I don't know if you've watched that.
There's loads of great horror. There's #Alive. Have you?
Yes, yeah. That was
I
the
haven't watched
zombie
it
one.
yet. Yeah, I haven't watched it yet.
Yeah. That's fun. It's fun.
Okay.
There's Train to Busan as well. Have you seen that?
Yeah, of course I have. Yeah.
And I don't know why I didn't pick that. Actually, I love that film.
I thought you would. I definitely thought you would, but I think everyone's watched that. I think.
Yeah.
It's, and deservedly so. It's again, it puts emotion behind a subgenre of horror that wouldn't necessarily have much emotion. Of course, the zombie film came from, it has its like origins from Haiti and that kind of thing. But after George A. Romero, it has this thing where it's a social commentary. Whereas with Train to Busan, it was so emotional. As all
it was so emotional.
Korean, so emotional and
some humor as well.
Yeah.
And slapstick bits.
It's very similar to what we've been discussing, the themes.
Yeah,
and,
but I like that we picked two films that are maybe less well known, because some of the some of the ones like Train to Busan have got a lot of attention recently, but it is worth going back further in these directors' catalogs and actually finding these films. A film, Thirst. Have you watched Thirst? Park Chan-wook.
I think I watched it because I remember when it came out and there was a lot of reviews going on. It's like sexy vampires and I was probably going through my Anne Rice stage at that, and I was like, sexy vampires, I'm a goth. So I think I did watch it, but I don't think it left much of an impression on me. But again, I was a stupid 18-year-old, so
okay,
maybe I should go.
That's another one anyway for people to check out if if they're looking for things to add to the list. So
so out of the two films, if we had to put one up as the film that people should check out, if it was just one film, what would you choose?
I'm so torn because I have such a love for both of them. I think if we're looking at purely as horror, I think A Tale of Two Sisters.
Yeah.
If I was recommending like just a film as an entry into Korean cinema for people, I might recommend The Host but separate from the horror genre, it has those elements of horror, but I do think Tale of Two Sisters is more an outright kind of traditional horror, what you would think of as a horror film. So maybe Tale of Two Sisters.
Woo, I win. I definitely think it's a film that, like, kind of, if you need an introduction to K-horror, it's the one to go for.
Yeah.
So
I think it was so influential as well. A lot of that stuff has crept into Western filmmaking, but back when that came out in like 2003 or something. And I think it was very unique for its time and definitely influenced a lot of American filmmakers and stuff. So it's worth checking out. Yeah, definitely.
So just to end up, I always ask, what is your favorite horror film?
My favorite horror film. I think I have two springing to mind. I was going to say The Babadook.
Okay.
I love The Babadook. I know so many people that hate it. But to me, we've talked about this, the whole psychological aspect, the fact that it's a film that's dealing with grief and the loss of this woman's husband and the traumatic experience of that and how that affects, her and her son. And then just the genuinely creepy moments. I just think it's such a good film. So good. And then The Mist as well. I love The Mist.
Okay.
Very like classic, like that horror movie, kind of Twilight Zone-esque kind of thing. I love that. Kind of, it's kind of cheesy, but it has some very intense bits with all those monster moments. Pretty cool. So I've given you two, but there you go. Yeah,
very good. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining me.
No problem. Thank you for having me. It's been fun.
So that was myself and Kelan O'Reilly discussing Bong Joon-ho's The Host and 2003's A Tale of Two Sisters, two amazing Korean horror films that I encourage you to go out and watch. They almost define the Korean horror genre. Two very different subgenres, but two that should definitely be watched. A few other films that I think you should go watch would be Park Chan-wook's Vengeance trilogy. Although not explicitly horror, it does have some psychological horror traits and themes. That includes Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance, Old Boy, and Lady Vengeance, one of my favorite films. I would also encourage you to check out the found footage film Gonjam Haunted Asylum, which was actually filmed at the Gonjam Asylum, which is infamous for being one of the top 7 world's freakiest places to visit. I also watched The Dollmaster, which, yeah, sure, if you like that kind of cheap thrills, as myself and Kelan were talking about. There is also Train to Busan, which we mentioned, which obviously has been one of the most popular Korean horror films to date. It spins the zombie genre on its head. It's not all about the gore and the guts. It's also about the emotions and the family behind the zombie pandemic that happens within the film. There is a lot of horror films within the K-horror genre that deal with Western folk tales and fairy tales. We've got stuff like Cinderella, we have The Red Shoes, and we have Hansel and Gretel, which I would definitely check out just to see the Korean take on a grim fairy tale. So that is it for this episode of What a Scream podcast. Thank you so much for joining us and listening. As before, you can find us on Instagram and Facebook at What a Scream Podcast. And you can also email us at whatascreampodcast@gmail.com if you have any thoughts or if you'd like to get involved in the podcast. I'm always welcoming new guests and new views on the horror genre. So thank you so much. I hope everyone is staying safe and getting through this strange time as best as they can. And don't forget to stay horrific.
Shouldn't be afraid of